Hello.
Hello.
Now in time.
Yes. So I'm not seeing the interpreters. Let me call Caroline to see why she's not connecting yet. Tinashe, good morning.
Morning, Shadrach. How are you?
I'm good.
Good to see you. Hi, Tina. How are you?
Tina, you are muted.
Yes, I'm fine. Good to see you on board.
Thank you.
So we are starting in 13 minutes. We are going to wait for that minute on 13.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Benito. I can see Benito's belly immediately.
Hello, Benito. We are saying hi.
Also, they did not even hear you.
Yeah, so Shadrach,
Yes.
Tina, I'm saying I'm joining from another laptop. I want to listen to the presentations and discussions.
Okay, it's good.
Yes. How is it? How is it, Rwanda?
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tina, you're in Finland. Okay.
Yes, in Helsinki, but it's great. It's above zero, so we're getting there.
Great. Sorry for that. Okay. All the best, Tina.
Thanks, my brother. Hi, Christoph.
Hi, good morning, Tinashe. How are you
How
doing?
are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. I don't know whether to call you Sophie or Laure-Sophie.
Sophie is going to be fine.
Good to see you.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hello, Tina.
Hi, Laure-Sophie. Nice that you had time to join us in time.
Thank you for your
And
patience.
even the two presentations, that was very, very well appreciated.
You're welcome. Just send the last version I just sent you. Yeah.
Yes, I
Okay.
noted, but I think it was already circulated. But we can, I think, Shadrach, afterwards we can submit Tinashe's presentation and then Laure-Sophie's presentation, the correct version, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning once again. I think that now we can start because it's a 12 Kigali time and 11 a.m. Central European time. So we are going to start with the opening remarks with the PAFO CEO, Dr. Babafemi, and Tina from FFD. And I don't know if Christophe have the remarks. Christophe, on behalf of AHA, because this project we are working together for FFD and AHA. That would be good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Can add some words after that.
Yeah, sure. So, Dr. Babafemi, you are welcome to give the opening remarks. Thank you. You are muted.
Thank you very much. Once again, I want to welcome everybody to this edition of the UNFCCC capacity building event. First of all, I want to really encourage those of us that were there throughout last year. We know that this platform has been helping us to build our capacity. And those of us that are at the COP, we can see the usefulness of this platform. So I want to encourage everyone as we discuss the Paris Agreement and the national participation in that and what this agreement means and how are the countries going to be involved in the negotiations of the agreement. And we know the agreement is to limit the global temperature increase to well below 2%. And to achieve this needs the participation of all stakeholders, including the countries. And how can the country be involved in the nationally determined contribution? Those are the things that we are going to be looking at in this session. And because the nationally determined contribution is very important, and the action plan by each country is also critical to achieving the Paris the Paris agreement. So that is why I want us to really pay attention and contribute. We also have some experience in our own interactions with climate experts, climate change people are advocating for climate change. So we have interaction with them, we have discussions with them, and this is the opportunity to share our own experiences in this section so that others who are not as vast as we are will be able to learn from us and they'll be able to know how to motivate their countries to be ready for the NDCs and also make the plans that have been made at the national level, how they can also influence and contribute to such plans, which is very, very important. So, and I also want to thank the resource persons that have been available all the time in contributing to the various themes that have been discussed in the past and that are going to be discussed this year. We are looking for your support again and all the technical team that are behind the scenes, making sure that this platform is delivering the service to all the people that are participating. So wherever you are participating, say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome you to today's edition. Thank you. I wish you a successful and fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Babafumi, for this opening remarks and reminding us the purpose of this seminar we're having. Thank you very much. And now we can proceed with Tina for the remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much already for that nice introduction and setting the scene. From the side of Andreas Hermes Academy, AHA, it's also for me, it's a pleasure to be able to continue this webinar or the webinar series on Unfccc capacity building, also in 2024, in this great team with PAFO, with FFD, and also support from WFO. After last year's focus on the overarching global level, we will now increasingly focus on the national level and especially on the NDCs that will be revised now by 2025. They are also of central importance because they're on the national level, and that is also where farmer organizations can get involved and help shape these national frameworks also in the interest of agriculture. So I'm very much looking forward to learn more about the NDCs, the role of farmer organizations. And I would also like to ask all of you to share the invitation links and the recordings of that webinar as widely as possible, so the whole farmer and FO community can profit as much as possible from these exchanges here. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christopher, for the remarks. So Tina, you're welcome for the remarks too.
Thank you, Shadrach, and welcome everybody. As Mr. Babafemi and Christoph said, that we have been already plunging into different aspects of the climate negotiations, and we want to look at them, especially from the point of view of farm organizations, how you can increase your voice, how you can increase your being recognized as climate actors, and finally, how you can advocate for more funding, because we know that only a minuscule part of all climate funding reaches farmers and farm organizations. As Chris was saying, we have been focusing more on understanding the global level of the climate negotiations, what is happening in the conference of the parties meetings, and then so-called SABSTA meetings that take place in June. But now we're trying to understand better what is the dynamic at the national level and how we could influence more the national level for the point of view of farmers. I'll share you now my screen, and I'll show very shortly the program of today and the speakers. So as you see, the whole session will be conducted with 2 languages. So there is an interpretation in French available that you can find on the lower bar of your screen. And all the material will be available both in English and French. We'll focus here on the NDCs, nationally determined contributions. We'll have first Laure-Sophie Schiettecatte, I hope that I pronounce the name correctly, who is working as a climate change specialist in FAO. She will go through what are the NDCs about, the content, the purpose, how to understand them better. And then we have Mr. Tinashe Chavhunduka, who is a program officer in the Southern African Farmers Union, SACAU. And he will go through, in general, how the farm organizations could influence the NDCs, especially plunge into the case of Eswatini. Afterwards, we'll have a short survey through Mentimeter. I'll come back to this. And you have to check in your chat box after the presentations and questions and answer sessions. I'll guide you to a site where you can reply to certain questions. But first of all, we'll have the presentations. And with no further ado, I would like to ask Ms. Laure-Sophie Schiettecatte to take the floor and tell us more about what are the NDCs and why they are important and what could be done to influence them better.
Thank you, Tina. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm thanking everyone of the panel and Tina who invited me. So as Tina mentioned, I'm a climate change specialist at FAO in headquarters in Rome, in Italy. I'm working for the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment, and I'm more specialized on the greenhouse gas accounting, but I'm also, because of that, working on the NDC. So I'm going to present you what about the NDC. Probably it's better that I do it in French, given that I did a slide change on the French slides. So the French translator are not lost. It's well aligned with what we have in English. So let me share my screen. This one. Oops, not too much. All right. Alors, le renouvellement des CDN. Donc, CDN, ça veut dire contribution déterminée au niveau national. Alors, déjà pour commencer, ce qui s'est passé dernièrement à la COP28.
And so we start with COP28 in Dubai. There was a declaration on food systems that are resilient and climate change. And so agriculture was an important topic in this declaration. And so the declaration ended with the heads of states and government said that all that is done in the long term should include agriculture and food systems. And so agriculture and food system should be adapted and transformed in order to fight against. So if we continue with the Paris Agreement, what is the Paris Agreement? It is the negotiation on climate change. And so they came up with that is in 2015, that is when the Paris Agreement was adopted. And so this is to limit the average global temperature increase and also to enhance resilience to climate impacts, because many of which will be unavoided, and also to align financial flows in this. And so how do countries participate? So the Paris Agreement is that provides for each party has to set its own target known as the nationally determined contribution, that is NDC. And what is an NDC? It is a climate action plan to reduce emissions and adapt. And so each party is required to draw up an NDC and update it every 5 years. And each version should actually raise ambitions by reducing emissions. And so we have the general objective, and after that, we have 2 sections. And so we shall have adaptation. And so the countries will come up with actions for and also for adaptation, attenuation and adaptation. And so each new version should actually increase the ambition by reducing the emissions and also in adaptation measures. And so each one that is done should actually have actions on adaptation. And so this is based on what has been done. And so this is actually to guarantee a sustainable future for the planet. And so here you can look at you can see the cycle for the of the agreement, the Paris Agreement. And so the second NDC was on 2020. And so the other one that is and so that was done in 2020. So the third cycle is 2025 and then to 2030. And so we also have the global stock take. And so this global stock take should actually focus on the impact of the NDCs on adaptation. And so this is towards realization of the objectives. And so the outcomes are from each country's. And so for 2025 is that includes the objectives. And so each country needs to develop and communicate the NDCs. And so for each country is supposed to implement them and monitor their implementation at the national level, that is the NDC, and also to do reporting. And so the agreement has to be monitored. And so here, this shows what will be done, what is the methodology that is going to be used, and also this recommends the methodologies to be used. And so all countries are actually going to use this to, so this is at the national level, the NDCs, and then and so there will be a global stock take, and so all the NDCs are available in this website. And so you can actually see the NDCs of each country, and you can also see the lessons at the national level. And so these you can actually do comparisons. And so this actually is necessary for economical transformation. And so the CDN actually fixes the objectives for each sector. And so you are going to see the actions, and so there will be activities on all the sectors. And so the countries will start they're going to look at the recommendations that have been done in the Paris Agreement. And so all sectors should contribute to the change in reducing emissions and also adapting to climate change that they are already feeling. And so each NDC will take into account the reductions of emissions and other important requirements, such as fighting against poverty. And so that is for the country. The in charge of the emissions must actually ensure that reduction is actually more and also urgent, that is those who are producing more. And so to come up with an NDC, that is the whole sectors that is in the governments. And so governments should actually undertake evaluation of the capacities of their countries in order to reduce emissions. And so this is based on the level of economic and industrial development, as well as the vulnerability level in the country. So how do we participate? That is within the government and the ministries who, and so they are not the only ones that do, and so they need to involve all the actors, that is the enterprises, civil society, the universities, and also the citizens. And so each one has a role to play, and that is why many governments invite the different groups to participate in developing the priorities of the NDC. And so this is a state of affairs of the NDCs up to date. And so this is for 2022. And so you can see the growth and also the emissions in the different, and so in the NDCs, we need to have activities for each sectors for adaptation and attenuation. And so we have those that are conditional, and that is the state puts in place policies, and conditional means that the state does this with the international, and so all countries. And so when you do the stack talk between the conditional and not conditional, you note that if you respect the agreement, you can actually reduce emissions. And so when you look at the difference between that, what is conditional and not conditional between 2023, 2020, you need to get 15, and that is the unit, because we also have these greenhouse gases. And so in order to compare them, you need to get these figures. And so this shows the potential of climate temperatures. And so if we have 15, 23 gigaton, and so given the other scenario, so that we can respect the Paris Agreement. So these are the comparisons. And so that is important for the financing. And so we need to reduce this gap. And so that we can respect the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And so this has to be reduced by 43%. And so there is a lot of work to be done in this. And so where does these emissions come from? So the general emissions, which are 52 gigaton of CO2, it comes from energy and then agriculture. And so we also have the forest, and so we need to calculate these. We also have energy and industrial processes. And so the first sector after that is agriculture. Apart from that, so where do we get these emissions? We have emissions that come from the activities, and those are the main sources of the emissions from agriculture. And we know that agricultural sector, we need to know where the potentiality is coming from. And so where do we need to reduce emissions, carbon emissions? And so we need to reduce emissions. We also have the sequestration of carbon in agriculture that is on the soils. We also have the restoration of the ecosystems, and also for soil conservation. This is a little bit scientific, but we know that conservation of the soil is an important aspect for sustainable management of land. And so these agreements make reference to the soils, and there are treaties that are on these. And so the soils contain up to 2.7 times more carbon than in the atmosphere. We also have like agroforestry, the management of and controlling the erosion, and also limiting working on the soil. And so the database for the NDCs, when you look at Africa, the research policies and also the measures for adaptation, we have 27 countries who have 63 activities for working on this. And so we also, as you can look at the graph, we also have the practices for soil management. That could be the irrigation and all the aspects for adaptation. And so we have practices for adaptation. And so here it is just to give you a list of activities that are linked to soil, and especially by farmers. That is activities. And so we also have the strengthening of capacities of farming. And so we can actually come up with 100 pieces of land where we could use as demonstration plots. And so to show how agriculture can be conserved. And so, okay, she's reading very fast. And so this helps in adapting to climate change. And so, for example, for FAO, we do capacity building. We also support policies. We do research and analysis and tools. And so we support capacity buildings in order to do also activities, and also monitoring activities and reporting. And so this, and so for our work, we help countries to work on policies. And so we also help them in coming up with the NDCs. And so for the policies, we have the toolbox. And so this is what has been used in the agricultural sector. And so we have next, and how could we all participate? So these are the activities. That is for agriculture, which can be fronted, and so we need to actually be involved in the planning of climate activities and especially of the local community. And so this is also we need to also estimate the carbon, and so that we can actually see how to calculate the carbon imprint. And so you could actually contribute, and also you can calculate how you can reduce the emission. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Laure-Sophie. That was a very interesting presentation. Before I give the floor for a couple of questions, could you go back to the slide where you presented the 3 tools that FAO has available? Maybe you could say just 2 sentences of each tool and where you can find these.
Yes, I was afraid to be out of time, so I just mentioned them very quickly. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. So we have 3 tools that allow countries to do an environmental impact of their politic or even project or long-term strategy. So they are complementary tools. It doesn't mean that you need to use the 3 of them, but you can use them independently. And some output of ABC are used for NEXT, and some output of NEXT are used for NDC tracking tool. So very briefly, ABC map stands for Adaptation, Biodiversity, and Carbon Mapping Tool. So it's a tool that helps you to understand the trends of past land use changes. What was the impact in terms of biodiversity and also carbon stock changes? And also what are the trends in temperature, precipitation, and so on. So you can look at that nationally, but you can look at that regionally, so within the country or even at project level. The next is for Nationally Determined Contribution Expert Tool. So it's a tool that was developed to support country in the process of the Paris Agreement. So it was a tool to help country to analyze their NDC, to see the impact of each action that can be a project or a policy on the long term. So once the policy is implemented, we know that there's still some benefits on the long term. So it's a tool that has a 30 years time series, and you can analyze any kind of action that is linked to the food sector and the energy sector. And the NDC tracking tool, it's a new tool that helps country to track their NDC and to track the progress of the NDC. So, and it's not targeting just, it targets all the sectors. So it's food, energy, waste, IPPU. And so the country can see if the policy that are implemented and the mitigation impact that was expected is achieved or not. So it's all of them are very good to help to understand what's going on, what happened, what's going on, what else needs to be done in order the country can minimize environmental impact of its action. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Laure-Sophie. This was very insightful. I would like to invite now a couple of questions. We'll have a longer question and answer a session after Tinashe's presentation, but if you have something urgent, this would be an opportunity. It seems that I don't see any questions coming in at the moment. I hope that you can stay with us, Laure-Sophie, so that in case there are more questions afterwards. It seems that your presentation was so rich that people have to digest it a bit. Nevertheless, we'll go now more into the farm organizations and how they have been assessing the NDCs and what has been done in Eswatini. So could I invite Tinashe to take the floor and give his presentation?
Thanks so much, Tina. Let me try to put up my slides. Meanwhile, I'll just say thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this very important session where we are discussing salient issues about climate change and the processes that the governments are trying to put together to deal with this. I don't know why my presentation is not up yet, but I'll try again.
So can I help you, Tinashe? So I can share your presentation because I have it.
That will be helpful. I think we can save time by doing that. Thanks, Shadrach.
Okay, let me just a minute.
Okay. So meanwhile, as he's putting up my slides, I can just say, I mean, we all understand that the UNFCCC processes are actually led by national governments. But I don't think governments alone can do this work without actually involving the stakeholders. I would say...
Is this your presentation?
Yes. Yes, thanks, Shadrach. So what I was saying was that in as much as these are government-led processes, governments are committing to do some work in mitigating climate change, but also adapting to it. And within that space, there will be very important stakeholders that are supposed to actually do the action on the ground, of which farmers' organizations are actually a critical player in the agricultural sector. That's why we have a case to make in terms of farmers' organization to say, what do we do? Do we wait for national governments to invite us to participate, or do we find ways of actually getting there ourselves? Because what we have seen is that if we wait for national government to invite us to participate, quite often they don't, because they've got their own interest. So we need to find ways of actually getting ourselves into that space and make sure that we make a case for the agricultural sector. We cannot expect the government to determine what the farmers are on the ground are going to do in terms of mitigating, whilst they are not actually engaging the farmers when they are putting these documents in place. So that is the preamble that I can give in terms of why farmers' organizations really need to be part and parcel of the process of putting these documents together. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share a few slides here. Laure-Sophie has actually done a great piece of work on the processes. I had a slide on that, so I think I'll have to skip that. But I can also share slides that I prepared and presented in another different platform that can also give more perspectives regarding the NDCs, especially pertaining to the Southern African region. You can go to the next slide, Shadrach. So here we are just saying, okay, nationally determined contributions, why are they important for farmers' organizations? When I am saying farmers' organizations, I'm also already referring to farmers, because farmers' organizations derive their legitimacy from having members who are actually the farmers who are working at either plot or farm level. I'm not going to touch on the renewal process. I think Laure-Sophie has already done a little bit of work on that. But like I said, I'm happy to share some slides that I also presented to just make sure that we add more information regarding the processes for the benefit of those who might not be aware of how these processes work at global level. Then I will also share a little bit on the work that we did in Southern Africa to just check out how our nations here are faring regarding their participation in the NDC processes, but also what the NDCs in Southern Africa are saying regarding agriculture. And then I should have put more information on the case of Eswatini, but I think the information that I have there will be suffice for this particular platform to just see what other NL4s are doing to make sure that they are part of the processes of formulation of the NDCs. So I've already said this slide I'm going to skip, but I'm happy to share some slides regarding that. I will still cement the issue that these processes are government-led, but how do we find ourselves in there as farmers' organizations, for example? Because it's unfair that governments will talk about mitigation and adaptation in the agricultural sector and expect the farmers to act on those without them being part and parcel of the process of actually putting these NDCs together. So in as much as they are led by governments, but how do we find ourselves in there if we are then expected to actually carry out the activities that the government will have put in the NDCs documents? You can move to the next slide, Shadrach. So let me briefly touch on the NDCs. Of course, there's a talk of adaptation there, but from where I sit, I think it's mainly talking about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, which is more of mitigation. Adaptation is there also, but when we read the NDCs, we find that they are more focusing on mitigation than adaptation. But what we have seen in Southern Africa is that the majority of countries in the SADC region actually feel that they need to work more on making sure that farming systems are resilient to the climate change challenges that we are facing. So the reason why they think that there's need to focus more on adaptation is that we have been experiencing quite a number of disasters in the region, some of which you already know: the cyclones, the floods, the droughts, the pest manifestation, you name them. So when they look at what should be the reaction of farmers to the climate change challenge, they think that adaptation will be more appropriate to actually respond to the climate change challenges that the region is actually experiencing currently. Of course, we take note that in as much as our focus in the region should be on adaptation, the countries already signed up onto the Paris Agreement. So those commitments that they made when they were signing up to be part of the UNFCCC should have, they have to actually action on them. And we also say that, going forward, chances are very high that markets will start to respond to how you are working on mitigating the effects of climate change. So trade will actually probably eventually force us as a region to focus more on mitigation. So we need to be already doing some work in that regard, so as not to wait for being forced by trade policies that may not be favoring those countries that are not doing much in terms of mitigation. And we also acknowledge that in as much as our greenhouse gas emissions might not be as significant as other bigger or highly industrialized countries, we still are emitting greenhouse gases in the activities that we are doing. I will touch a little bit on some of the activities that are actually causing some of these greenhouse gas emissions in our region. So we are saying we need to have a balancing act between adaptation and mitigation. We don't want to find ourselves being forced to mitigate. We have to already start working on how to mitigate the impact of climate change. You can move to the next slide, Shadrach. So I've already touched on in our region that you will see in the other slide that I will show later that agriculture, okay, when we put it together to become AFOL, which is agriculture, forestries, and other land use, we don't contribute much, in general terms as a region, as compared to other sectors like energy. You would know that most of our countries are still dependent on coal-fired power stations to generate energy in the region. So we see quite a great deal of greenhouse gas emissions coming from other sectors as energy, transport, mining, and others. So the contribution you'll see in the statistics that I'm going to share, that the contribution coming from the agricultural sector is not as significant as would be in other highly industrialized countries. So what could be the agricultural mitigation possibilities? So when we look at livestock management, we look at manure management. We have seen farmers and other rural people starting to move to use of biogas, which is advantageous in that you'll be, minimizing the greenhouse gases that are coming from the manure just lying idle there, but also that it's a sort of a good source of energy as compared to other sources of energy like firewood and others. And then we've seen farmers, especially those who are dealing with dairy farming, they've started working on improving feeding regimes to change the processes in the rumen in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming up out of the digestive processes of rumens. So they are actually starting to work with feed producers to find the right mixes of feeds and other additives that can actually reduce the methane that is generated when the rumens are actually digesting or feeding and digesting. So another point to make here is that in Africa, meat consumption is still low as compared to developed countries. And the demand to reduce the number of cattle seems going against the goals of improved in nutrition. If you move around in Africa and talk to farmers and say, you have to start looking at reducing your herds because they are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. They don't seem to get that. They think that they are not eating enough meat. If you go to milk as well, I think our consumption of milk is still very low compared to other parts of the world. So they think that it's, in as much as it is for a good cause globally, it might not be very appropriate for Africa, but also for Southern Africa in general. So we are still actually working on increasing our herds. As you know, that the diseases are also coming to decimate our herds. Like the past few years, we have been having diseases that are actually killing quite a number of cattle, for example. Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, foot and mouth disease, and many other diseases that are actually affecting. So they're actually reducing the herds that we are actually building. So it's another area of contestation, and we always want to tell farmers that be part of the process. You are going to eventually be forced to do this. So you would rather be proactive and start working on that instead of markets and trade to force you to reduce the number of herds. Then in countries where there is a production of rice, examples of Tanzania, Malawi, Madagascar, and a few more in our region. Working on, okay, it has been happening, but they have actually improved on how they are doing their rice production using SRI, as you would see there, sustainable rice intensification. So it has been observed that if you alternate between wetting and drying the rice fields, when it's wet, that's when it emits a lot of methane. But when it's dry, the emission of methane from dry rice fields is actually very significant, to the point of 60% reduction. So we are pushing that for all the rice farmers to say they should be using this method of alternating between wetting and drying. I mean, the thinking has been that rice is such a very thirsty crop, and it has to be immersed in water all the time. But we're actually seeing that the opposite is true. So farmers are actually using that method of alternating between wetting and drying to make sure that when it's dry, the levels of methane that is being emitted from the rice fields is actually very, very significantly reduced. Then when you look at most of the climate smart agriculture activities, they come with, of course, the first thing is investment, but also more work. If you give an example of conservation agriculture that is not appropriately mechanized, we see that there's a lot of manual labor there. So how do we then work around mechanizing conservation agriculture and other climate smart agriculture activities so that farmers don't shy away from taking up these activities because they are already struggling to meet the labor requirements on their small fields. So how do we then mechanize to make sure that we reduce in terms of the labor they have to put in? We also know that this is very critical because in most smallholder farmers that we have as members in our region, this labor is actually mainly done by women and children. So you find that women have got additional work in looking after the families, cooking and preparing everything for children as well. So if they are taken more onto the field to deal with these increased labor demands by trying to deal with climate change challenges, it becomes even more problematic for them. We have seen school children being taken out of school in some cases to actually support with them labor at the farm. So this might not be good for the future of children. In our region in general, we've seen that extension is mainly a domain of national governments and their local chapters, but we've seen that gradually national governments are failing to put more resources to support extension, especially to meet the demand that comes up with increasing demands. When you introduce new things or new ways of doing things in the agricultural sector, you see that even the extension officers that are there also need to continuously being trained to update themselves. When they were in school or in college being trained, it could be that some of these words that are coming up were not part of their curriculum. How do we then make them more appropriate for them to be able to respond to the new challenges that come with working against the climate change challenges in the respective countries? So the other point to make is that in most of our countries, smallholder farmers actually practice what we call integrated farming systems, where they do crop farming, but also livestock farming. So when you look at the principles of conservation agriculture, for example, where you say you should leave biomass to cover the soil, but then after harvesting, cows and other animals are left to roam around and they eat up all this biomass and exposing the soil again to wind erosion and many other challenges that are associated with the exposure of soil. So how do we then balance in making sure that in integrated farming systems, we still keep biomass and we also have to provide fodder for the livestock to find something to eat in the lean season? Of course, we see agroforestry as a promising sort of system, and many countries are actually promoting this for many reasons. And we think that it's the way to go. We are actually pushing the agenda of promoting agroforestry in the work that we are doing in our region. You can push the next slide, Chandra. So when it comes to forests and other land use, we see that land clearing for agricultural expansion remains an issue in Africa in general. This is mainly because of the large-scale land-based investments. These big corporates coming from the developed world coming to invest in Africa. And when they make a case for them to be allowed by governments to invest, they say they are going to support the countries with food security, and they are also going to support countries. But what we have seen is that most of the products that they produce or commodity they produce are actually exported. In as much as it's good for forex generation in countries, but the damage that we have seen in terms of clearing large pieces of land for agricultural production is actually decimating our forests in Africa. In addition to that, smallholder farmers as well. I mean, the population in Africa is increasing, and we know that the land size remains the same. So demand for younger generation to have pieces of land is also increasing. Where we used to say these were commons or grazing areas, we've seen an encroachment by smallholder farmers actually clearing land as well to start agricultural production. So this is something that is actually causing a lot of problems, or deforestation related problems. Food insecurity is also a major issue. We have seen, if you move around most countries, you see along the highways, people selling charcoal, for example. So in some cases, we get rural people cutting down trees for sale as firewood to generate income for a good cause, in some cases to send their kids to school, but also to get income to buy other necessities that they may not get from agricultural production. So how do we deal with the food insecurity, but how do we also make our people aware that cutting down trees is actually contributing to the climate change challenges that we are facing? So national governments are actually putting a lot of efforts in supporting people in the rural areas to plant trees. I know, for example, in Zimbabwe, there's actually a National Tree Planting Day, 5 December, if I'm not mistaken, where it's at government level promoting. You'll find the president himself actually planting trees in communities to promote planting of trees. And in other countries, we've seen in Zambia, Malawi also, we have seen farmers' organizations actually taking ownership of this process of planting trees, which is a good thing to try and reverse the deforestation that we are facing in the region. Then, of course, we know that agroforestry combines trees with farming. So trees are part of this. Some of these trees are actually beneficial in restoring soils, and they are also beneficial in producing fruit that can actually come in handy in terms of food security building at community level. You can move to the next slide, Shadrach. So I said earlier on that I'm going to share a little bit of statistics. I mean, I've already spoken to this, but if you look at the statistics that you see there, this is at a continental level in Africa. So Afolu contributes 30.9% of the greenhouse gases that we produce in Africa. So if you look at it compared to the other sectors, it's 69.1 for the rest. So that's why you find that it's sometimes difficult to convince farmers and other stakeholders working in the forestry to say, how do you make us, I mean, a case and say we need to be moving into greenhouse gas mitigation and all that, but we see other sectors that are continuously polluting more. So I think it's also important to note that their arguments are not just based on, they also say that when they look at the coal-fired power stations, especially here in South Africa, and there is actually a drive to build more of these. So they have a case there in terms of when they look at the statistics coming from other sectors or subsectors. You can move to the next slide. So this slide is the one I was talking about when I said we did some work, and we have to acknowledge the support that we are getting, but for this particular work, we got the additional funding from the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture of Germany, BMEL, and our partner Andreas MS Academy to do some quick analysis of our main thrust on this work was to check how farmers' organizations are actually participating in the development of nationally determined contribution documents in the countries. So you also see that emphasis of saying most of the countries are actually talking more, even within the NDC document, they're talking more of adaptation because they think that that is where they need to focus more on. So adaptation priorities included in agriculture. You see Mozambique, Tanzania, Eswatini, Zimbabwe. Even though some we find them, they touch a little bit on mitigation, but you could see actually in the work that we did that most of the countries are actually focusing more on adaptation. Out of the 13 countries, of course, this study was done in 9 countries, but you'd say that out of the 13, which is the total countries, I mean, they refer to adaptation and mitigation elements in the agricultural sector. Some of the measures they are talking about is livestock management. So, for example, improving of breeds that are more resilient to the climate change challenges that we are facing, crop management, fisheries, aquaculture management, and knowledge transfer. Then when they talk of mitigation measures in agriculture, they also talk about crop management, conservation agriculture, climate smart agriculture in general, soil management, afforestation, and agroforestry. When you analyze the countries, we are just giving an example of some of the countries that have got very good documents in terms of what is articulated in the NDC documents. Malawi looks to have the most progressive NDC in terms of mitigation, action, activities, and targets because they pin it on specific activities that they are going to do. That's where we come in now as farmers organization to say, if they are pinning it on specific activities that need to happen at plot or farm level, have we been part of the process of actually formulating these documents? It's one good thing to have a very good document, but it's a completely different thing to actually having these activities implemented at plot or farm level. Lesotho also has the most progressive stance in terms of gender. They really try to streamline it to the level of saying, oh, how do we make sure that women are also taken care of when we put these documents together? So of the 13 NDCs that we analyzed, just 6 of them, which is less than half, explicitly makes a reference to farmers or farmers organization. So you can see that when they mention farmers organization, they are just mentioning them, but they are not really saying they were part and parcel of the process of actually coming with these documents. So we still have a lot of work to actually do and make sure that they don't just mention about farmers organizations, but they also make sure that farmers organizations, including their members who are the farmers on the ground, are actually involved in the processes of actually putting these documents together. And what we see is that where farmers organizations and farmers are referenced, they are actually portrayed as beneficiaries or vulnerable groups and not key players who can actually make a positive contribution. I said at the beginning that if national governments actually pin on specific activities and say, we are going to mitigate by reducing A, B, C, D, or by doing this at farm or plot level, how is it then possible that farmers are not part of that commitment? Because they will have to actually act on it, of course, with the support of other role players and national governments. So some of the capacity building, what we see countries doing to try and build the capacity of their farmers is, for example, Malawi talks about climate resilient agronomic practices for smallholder farmers. Lesotho, building of capacity in climate resilient agronomic practice for smallholders. You can see that the focus is more on smallholder farmers in Southern Africa, because those are actually the ones in the majority. Zambia focus on training of farmers to strengthen climate change planning, of course, to make sure that farmers are already prepared for any disaster that may happen. Seychelles is supporting with insurance schemes for farmers. They are moving away from the conventional type of supporting the farm, but to be innovative and trying to put mechanisms such as insurance schemes that are actually possible for smallholder farmers to take up. Tanzania is talking about protecting smallholder farms against climate-related shocks, including crop insurance as well. So these are some of the things that we see. But I think the emphasis I have to make on this slide is that I honestly don't think that farmers organizations are at a level where they can claim a stake and say they are really participating in the formulation of the NDCs. They need to do more. And we had a workshop where we actually emphasized that it may not be that they have to wait for national government to invite them to this platform. We were actually trying to find ways of identifying entry points for them to be able to go in and force their presence in this process. You can go to the next slide, but I'm still going to just emphasize on a few points. Now, using a case study of Eswatini, to say in Eswatini, some positives are coming out of what we saw there in the studies that we did, that the process actually took a whole of government and whole society approach. So whole of government is all departments or ministries coming together to say, we are part of this. Because we see that in other countries, there's a problem of where the climate change platforms are housed. Some are housed in National Energy Department, some are housed in environmental departments and all that. So in Eswatini, we saw that they actually took a whole of government to say all government departments should be part of it, but also to include whole society now, where farmers organizations, civil society organizations are part of the process of coming together with the document. But we also still see that even in Eswatini, further engagement are still needed in the implementation and investment plans. I said earlier on that it's a good thing to have a very good document, but we always lack in implementation of these good plans, but also the resources that have to come with making sure that you actually implement what you plan to do. Otherwise, it remains a pipe dream, a very good NDC document, but with no action on the ground. We argue as farmers organizations that we are an important stakeholder and role player in the NDC's renewal process and not the beneficiaries. I said earlier on, when you look at the way the documents are put together, farmers organizations are just mentioned as the by the way type of thing to say, yeah, of course they are in the agricultural sector, but they are going to benefit from all this process instead of actually making sure that they are part and parcel of the process of formulating the NDC documents, but also the implementation of it. As now, this is our member farmer organization in Eswatini has been very active in the process of renewal of the NDCs, and we see that government highly regards them as an important partner, which is actually something to learn for our other farmers organizations to say, how do they find themselves in the same sort of situation with us now, to say we can share information on how they ended up actually being part of this process of being an important partner or stakeholder in the NDC formulation process. So some of the statistics or the information that we may share, that okay, they have 20,000 members nationally, and they play a very critical role in sharing information. They get information internationally from SACAU and other sources, and they take it to their farmers. But they also take information from their members and take it to platforms where governments will be discussing maybe national policy development and all that. And they amplify the voice of farmers in climate change discourses nationally, but also globally. So I think something to learn to say, how do you find as a farmers organization in that space? Is it not something that you can also learn from Eswatini farmers organization to make sure that you are part and parcel of the process of formulating these documents? We argue, after the work that we did, we argue that farmers organizations should not wait to be invited by national government, because government have got so many priorities and they may not find it necessary for farmers organizations to be part of this, because they can still develop these documents independently of other stakeholders, because they have got deliverables to make in the process of the Paris Agreement they committed to. So we are arguing that farmers organizations should not wait to be invited. That's why I was saying we were trying to find entry points for farmers organizations in the countries to say, how do you find yourself in these platforms? Who is the focal point? I'll talk more about that in the next slide. In Eswatini, they formed the National Climate Change Committee that is also dealing with climate change issues, but also to deal with the NDC formulation process. But like in many countries, we've seen these platforms being dormant for one reason or the other. And how do we then make sure that where the platforms are already there, we strengthen them and make sure that they continue to do the work. Where they are not there, how do we make sure that all the important stakeholders come together to form these platforms? Because at least once you have this platform, it will give you an opportunity to pin responsibilities on specific entities to say you are part of this, what's happening with the implementation of the commitments that we made when we were putting together the platform. So we see that in Eswatini, they've now tried to form, they put a bill together that is actually going to make sure that they resuscitate that the National Climate Change Committee. So what are the other things that can actually make a case for farmers organizations to be part of the processes? So you have to demonstrate what you can bring. What is the value proposition that you bring as a farmers organization to say, okay, we've got so many number of farmers, we are working on so many hectares of land, we have got so many livestock, and you can claim that given where we are working and the statistics that we have, we can actually assist the government to meet their targets. So that is a value proposition farmers organization can actually bring on the table and say, we have a stake, and some of the work that you want to do can actually be done because we're working in all the regions in the country. We've got so many numbers of members, we've got so many livestock. So you by doing that, you're actually forcing national government to say they cannot go it alone. They need to work with these farmers organizations because they have got the members on the ground who can actually assist with mitigation efforts. So you can also maybe do some estimates there, calculating and saying, this is our potential as a farmers organization to assist in you getting your targets of mitigation efforts. So by so doing, you find that national governments cannot avoid working with you. So you have to make sure that you do some work and putting some data and statistics in place so that when you go to government to negotiate or to discuss, you at least have something to back you up in terms of the arguments that you are making. We are saying the agroforestry, I already discussed, this provides possibilities, but is there a need for a more market-driven strategies for this? When we are saying market-driven, we are saying, can markets also assist in making sure that agroforestry becomes something that we can drive in the region, but also Africa-wide to improve on our mitigation efforts? So how do we balance between income, biodiversity, and climate? You see, what we see is that farmers, before they look at the mitigation or adaptation, they are already grappling with challenges to do with income coming from their activities. So the first thing that comes to their mind when they are doing their day-to-day activities is that they want to look at how they can maximize on profits on their farming activities. So when you are talking to them, if you focus more on climate change, mitigation efforts, biodiversity and all that, and not talk to what goes into their pockets, sometimes you find that they just take it because it's you who is saying it, but in the long run, if they are left alone, they will still go back to a conventional way of doing things. So there must be a balance between what a farmer can get out of all these processes, and also maybe making sure that you maintain biodiversity, and you also want to make sure that you reduce the impact of their activities on farming. So SACAU as an organization, we've been actually doing a lot of work on creating awareness on the process to say, yes, these are the processes that are happening. How do you then find your way in the process so that you are not left out? So we provide strategic information that assists our members to make informed decisions on their day-to-day activities. We also build the capacity of our members to make sure that they have enough capacity to respond to the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis in their farming activities. So yeah, the next one will be my last slide, where I'll be just talking about again cementing what I've already said, to say farmers' organizations need to demonstrate to governments that they are an important partner and role player in this renewal and implementation. I've already said governments cannot expect farmers to implement what they commit in the NDC documents without them being a part and parcel of the process of actually coming with this document. So I have already said they can demonstrate it by saying, we have so many members in this country, we are farming on so many hectares of land, so that the government actually becomes aware that, so for us to be able to achieve the targets that we put in the agriculture or follow sector, we can work with this farmers organization because they already have the members that are working at ground or at the farm level. We also need to make sure that, like we are doing, this platform is very good for that, so that farmers organizations learn from each other and not wait to be invited by government in this renewal process. So those behind to learn from those that are advanced and make sure that we cross-pollinate and make sure that we pull each other at the same level and maybe make sure that we are almost at the same level and we are doing it the same way globally or Africa-wide continent. So we are saying that the current NDC revisions, we are working at the current revisions actually that are supposed to be submitted by February next year. I think we should be incremental in terms of both participation and contribution. So if we are not participating at all, we should be saying at least now we are participating. If we were participating, we should be saying, yeah, we've been participating, but then what? Can we then try to make sure that we are significantly part of the processes? Well, sometimes you are just invited, you sit in the meetings there, but you don't contribute much. How do we continuously improve and increase our participation in terms of the impact or the change that we want to see in the NDC documents? So we need to be continuously working on improving or increasing in participation. We also argue that government should be made aware that in as much as UNFCCC processes are governmental, they need farmers organizations for implementing what they commit to do in the agriculture sector in terms of GHG emission reductions. I'm just emphasizing what I've already said, that in terms of what they expect a farmer to do at farm or plot level, it has to be a farmer who commit to do that and participate in the whole process. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't take more than necessary time. Over to you, Tina.
Thank you, Tinashe, and thank you for the examples which kind of covered the whole Africa with the analysis, but also showed that despite agriculture not being the great source of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in Africa, it has a lot of at the stake because the governments really want to reduce emissions. And as Laure-Sophie was saying, for example, the soil carbon can be an important factor. I would now open the floor for questions. Remember that there are no stupid questions. These are very complex processes. So if you think that there's anything that you couldn't really understand, and the reflections on how the national farmers organizations, for example, could take part in the processes is very important for you. But please, the floor is yours. You can either raise your hand or write it in the chat, or there are different ways of requesting the floor.